Now, more than ever, teams must come together and work together to solve big challenges. And Trello is here to help. Trello, part of Atlassian's collaborative suite, is an app with an easy-to-understand visual format, plus tons of features that make working with your team functional and fun. With Trello, you can work with your team wherever you are, whether it's at home or in an office. Keep your workflow going from wherever you are with Trello. Try Trello for free and learn more at Trello.com. That's Trelm.
Welcome back to the Silver and Black today here on CBS Sports Radio, 1140 in Las Vegas. All of us in separate locations, the new normal for now at least, as we broadcast from our individual bunkers from our homes and bring the Raiders show to you, though, anyway, because that's what we do. We would not let anything get in the way of making sure we do that, so we appreciate you guys joining us. And this segment, we really want to get down and talk about what the Raiders were able to do in free agency and what it means for their overall financial health. And we bring in our good friend from overthecap.com, Jason Fitzgerald. Jason, thanks for coming in and being part of the show today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
All right, so if we look at let's start kind of at a macro level here with free agency in general. If we look at free agency in 2020, okay, no one thought a pandemic would hit the country and would bring everything to a halt. If free agency this year, not as many big deals, the number of years per contract and these big long-term deals didn't materialize, Jason. Is that the dynamic that was created by all this, or is it a multitude of things, the new CBA? What's the reason that you see for that?
No, I think it has more to do with the new CBA. I think that there are a lot of players that would prefer to get back to free agency 2-3 years from now. I think there's also some uncertainty on the team ends as to how the finances of this will shake out. So I think everyone was just kind of more in tune with doing shorter-term deals this year, 3 years or less, than really going long-term with those 5-year contracts.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it was interesting. And if you look at what the Raiders did, the Raiders went in. They had so many needs throughout the roster. So, but defense seemed to stick out, and so they focused on defense. They made some great moves, including Corey Littleton coming in, and they really did everything that I think they wanted to do. Of course, they went after Byron Jones. They got outbid for him, or they resisted maybe what he wanted. They spent the money on Littleton, but did not give out those long guaranteed contracts, just as we mentioned. Were you surprised by that the Raiders showed that much restraint?
No, I don't think I was too surprised by it. I mean, if you look at what they've done, and I know they were a little bit more active last year in free agency in terms of the big deal for Brown and a couple other things. But I think for the most part, I think they look at this as you're trying to piece something together for the next 2 years. And I think that's kind of what their moves are, is to see what they can do to maximize their return this year and on a couple of the deals, hopefully next year. And it may even be that they re-sign, the Eli Apples of the world after they complete a 1-year contract and they get a good look at them, and then they decide if they want to, invest longer term. So I think given where the Raiders are right now, I think it kind of made sense the way that they approached free agency.
Yeah, no, it worked out good for them, I think. And if you look at that, you look at the cap now, I know there's some deals that have not reported yet. You guys have them at about $6 million. But what are they going to do from a perspective of, they have some guys, of course, that pop out like Gabe Jackson, who could very well be a cap casualty. What do you see from them over the next few weeks? Because, people get excited, free agency, that first initial rush and all these signings, but actually a lot of work is done between now and the draft and after the draft. What do you see perhaps for the Raiders and how they manage that?
So I think the name that you mentioned is probably a good one. I think there's been a lot of rumors that Jackson's future with the Raiders could be in doubt. I think those are players that you look at after the draft. You look to see who the Raiders can draft. If they can draft someone that maybe they slot in as a replacement, that's when you probably consider cutting a player or going to him and saying, we want to reduce your salary to make it more realistic. If you don't take this pay cut, we just drafted another player that we're happy to try and slide in there. And sometimes you can get that to work. And then if that doesn't happen, I think the next thing that you do is you look at a couple of the big number contracts that they have. Rodney Hudson, for example, he's someone that they obviously envision to be here for a couple of years still. Brown, probably someone they envision to be here a couple of years. Those are the players you probably go in and you restructure those contracts to create cap relief in the short term and push the money out to the future.
Again, we're talking to Jason Fitzgerald from overthecap.com.
Hey, Jason, it's Chaz. I know there was a lot of talk about the minimum salaries and the increase there. My question was, with the minimum salaries increasing, I didn't get the whole number. It was $100K for that, and then maybe $100,000 increase for the rookie minimums. So I was thinking, it would take like a Hunter Renfrow, for example. Would it be possible that a rookie drafted this year in the 5th round would actually be making more money than a Hunter Renfrow this season?
Yeah, that's possible. In fact, that's probably likely. I mean, most of the time, the draft picks every year, their salaries are going to not only rise with the fact that there's minimum increases, and Renfrow got a minimum increase as well. Every player got an increase, but they peg the draft salaries to the rise in the salary cap. So traditionally, every year the salary cap goes up. So usually the rookies the year thereafter end up making more money than the ones the prior year. So he'll probably get out-earned by other players that are drafted this season.
But then they backload that, and the next year, then the minimum goes up for the already set players and not as much for those rookies.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Jason, now, one of the things that we talked about this week, we heard a lot of folks really, and some people criticize and talk about the Raiders as an organization being cash poor because they weren't signing Byron Jones and they weren't giving out these cash bonuses. The way the Raiders are structuring their contract, the shorter term, as we talked about a little bit earlier, without the big signing bonus, instead of doing some other things creatively, are we seeing that more throughout the league, or does it depend on where that team is? The Raiders clearly are on the crux of getting a lot more revenue stream than they've had in the past as a franchise. In the past, they have been unable to, due to contract negotiations and signing those long-term deals that they were stuck with. Are you seeing this throughout the NFL, more teams being more prudent, or is it a case-by-case basis?
I think overall in the NFL, they've moved away from the large signing bonuses. Some teams, because of their cap situations, are able to do it a little bit more effectively than others. Other teams that are in a real tight bind with the cap, they still have to use these signing bonuses. But teams have generally moved away from that just to maintain roster flexibility throughout the term of those players' contracts. If you think back to where the Raiders were back in probably 2012, give or take a year, their salary cap was such a mess because of the way that they did their contracts and the amount of signing bonus money that they used and restructuring bonus money that they used. They basically went into a period where they had to become an expansion team because of that. So they moved away from that once they finally cleared the roster out, and they really haven't gone back to it. Even though it's 2 GMs now, they've kind of stayed with the same system. And more teams are doing it this way to kind of be able to handle the salary cap better when it comes time to move on from these players 2 or 3 years from now as they get a little bit older and become less effective.
Yeah, and Jason, the one thing I was going to ask you too is, and I think you wrote about this as well, which is we're starting to see a little shift in the NFL, albeit a little bit slowly, to where trades in the league were not as numerous. They are becoming more and more common. Talk about that and how that impacts overall teams and why it's happening.
I think it's starting to happen more. I think part of it is a financial deal. If somebody pays a guarantee on a contract, I'll use, for example, Odell Beckham. The Giants paid a lot of money up front for him when they signed him to an extension. So when he gets traded to a team like Cleveland's going to look at that as basically getting a discount. They're going to look at that, that they're getting a $18 million a year player for $15 million a season. And I think more and more teams are starting to look at it that way. They have more flexibility with those players. It's better to, maybe trade a late draft pick for someone and kind of have control over that player and have had another team pay the guarantees than to go and sign a player in free agency where you have to pay all the guarantees up front and, you're kind of stuck with that player maybe for a longer period of time. So I think more and more teams are getting into it just because of the financial benefits of it. And I think you also have a lot of front offices that are getting younger, and they're seeing that there's just more avenues to acquire players than in the past, whereas, in the past it was either free agency or the draft, and if someone was looking to trade a player, 90% of the time it meant that the player was just on the downside of his career.
Yeah, and again, Jason Fitzgerald from overthecap.com is with us. And Jason, one last question for you. With all of this, and clearly there's going to be workout delays and things like that, there's a lot of folks who want to jump to the season being delayed. We're obviously not there yet. We're still only a few weeks into this thing. What are you hearing from folks around the league, though, about how this might change their plans, whether it be bringing guys in for workouts eventually? I know they can't do it right now, but how do you think this is all going to flush out?
Yeah, I don't think anyone really knows yet. I think when it comes to bringing guys in for workouts, the lower level free agents or guys that you might sign, I think that's almost going to be a start of training camp thing right now. Everything is so uncertain, and on a state by state basis, where I live in the Northeast is pretty much about to go into a full lockdown. It seems like other parts of the country maybe aren't as bad. It's something I think the teams are just taking day by day. I don't think they necessarily have a handle on it just yet, but you may see a little bit more action that comes, closer to that training camp period when things really do open up fully, because especially for players that have medical questions, you have to get them in to take a look at them. You can't just rely on gut instinct or being able to probably find a local physician and having him check somebody off on a physical. You probably want to get a much more in-depth look at those players before you commit any kind of significant money.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jason, I want to thank you and appreciate you spending the time with us. Hope you and your family are doing well there, and I'm sure we'll talk to you down the road. Make sure you check out Jason on overthecap.com. It's the source we go to constantly to track all this stuff. Jason, take care and be well.
Thanks a lot. Bye, guys.
All right, Jason Fitzgerald from overthecap.com. When we come back, we'll be joined by Tommy White, Local 872, the Laborers Union here. He'll tell us how the stadium is progressing and about the positive COVID test for a worker out there, but that had little impact on the construction of the stadium. You're listening to the Silver and Black today here on CBS Sports Radio 1140.